Welcome to our presentation, Approaching the Edge. We're going to share with you some incredibly important information about the modern Sitecore architecture and how you get there. Before we jump in, a quick second about us. Arke is a 13-year Sitecore partner based in Atlanta, Georgia. We're a full-service agency with teams of strategists and creatives, architects and developers, a bunch of dreamers who just love the Sitecore platform. You know Arke for case studies and symposium stories over the years like Dollywood, Chick-fil-A, Cannondale, Vacation.com, Helio, and others. I'm Eric Stoll, CEO of Arke, and I'm joined by Andy Uzick, the longest standing MVP in North America, the very first Sitecore customer, the first Sitecore partner. He's been with Arke for the past 8 years, and he continues to lead the way as we enter this modern world.
Thanks, Eric. Our goal today is to share the new modern architecture for Sitecore's WCMS products, Experience Manager and Experience Platform. We'll also touch on Content Hub. We're going to share how this modern architecture creates a bridge to all the new products that you're learning about here at this symposium. We'll share an approach to modernizing your existing implementation and to getting to the headless and composable stack. At the end, we'll have a quick demo showing just how significant this is to your bottom line. To start this conversation, we want to paint the big picture. There's a new rendering engine and developer experience in Sitecore. It makes it possible for you to write front-end components using Next.js, a flavor of React, instead of the traditional MVC. Because this is a JavaScript-based technology, these components are decoupled, which means front-end code that gets content via an API. Now, Sitecore has had a Headless Services API for quite a while. What we're focusing on here is how the new developer experience and supporting technologies are a revolutionary change. Of all the things that you'll hear about at this symposium, we think that this change is so significant for Sitecore that it single-handedly unlocks the value of the platform. Now, this is a developer talk, and in just a moment, we are going to get our hands dirty with some code. You might be here to talk code, but please understand that you developers are in one of the best positions to help your organizations understand the real business impact and value of this architecture.
Here are some of the bottom line stats you can take away. 10 times faster developer productivity, 50% decrease in overall run cost, 100% reduction in page delivery SLA responsibility, and the platform is infinitely more scalable.
The DXP industry is embracing the composable architecture. That means that instead of jamming all the features needed by marketers into one big monolithic system, we're embracing individual components that integrate. That means you can pick and choose, plug and play, whatever term you want to use. You get the benefit of opt-in capabilities and therefore right-size complexity. Now, we'll be talking about Next.js, Vercel, and Experience Edge and how they unlock the full potential of the Sitecore platform. To be clear, Next.js is a flavor of React. It is a component development language. Vercel is a SaaS hosting platform that hosts Next.js applications. And Experience Edge is a SaaS version of Headless Services and the Layout Services APIs, which would traditionally be hosted on CD servers. So let's take a quick look at the traditional Sitecore architecture. You have a SQL server, you have Solr indexes, a CM content authoring server, and then however many CDs you need in order to scale the requirements for the rendering of your pages and to serve requests. If you've managed an environment like this, especially in a full-blown XP environment, you know all too well how complex that gets. Deployments, management, upgrades, stability. We can share war stories later. But the next couple of slides will help you understand the migration path to a new architecture that will reduce the overall footprint of that architecture.
Remember our impact statements a couple slides back. To achieve that, we really have to move to a SaaS world. Sitecore is getting really close to that reality. As you might expect, part of that journey means we want to take advantage of Sitecore's managed cloud, version 10.1, and everything running in containers. So the first step is moving that CM server, the content authoring environment, to the managed cloud. If you're like many clients, you have XM, Or if you have XP, you're only using a tiny portion of that product. And remember, XP is a layer of features on top of XM. Evaluate what you really need in XP. In our opinion, the future of XP features is in the new Sitecore products, Sitecore CDP, Sitecore Send, etc. So take your dependence on XP out of the solution for just a minute. Level down your solution just a little bit, and then deploy your content authoring and publishing environment onto XM Managed Cloud.
The next big move is converting your rendering components from MVC to Next.js. You see a wholesale swap in this illustration, but Arke has an incremental methodology to move you from MVC to Next.js component by component without interrupting your releases. Ask us about this after the presentation by visiting our virtual booth. Once you've moved to Next.js, you can now kill the CD servers. Okay, in case there are any CD rights folks out there, I should say that no actual CD servers were harmed during this presentation. But what I am telling you is they are no longer needed. This is a huge advance towards reducing the complexity, management, overhead, licensing, hosting, and so on. The last move is to put Experience Edge into your architecture. This is one of the easiest steps. Your Next.js code doesn't care if it gets its content from Experience Edge or from an XM environment. The APIs are the same. Switching is really just a configuration change. But look what we've done. Your XM is now an authoring, page design, and publishing environment. It's on Managed Cloud, though technically it's not yet SaaS. However, it has been relegated to being just a back office tool used by your marketing team when they edit and create pages. When they publish, the content, layout configurations, etc. get published to Experience Edge. Vercel will detect that the content has changed and rebuild any static rendered pages. Your pages in a Next.js app, depending on your needs, can be done with static site generation or with server-side rendering for more dynamic pages, which, by the way, Vercel scales using serverless functions. When it does all of that, it consumes its content from Experience Edge. Vercel and Edge are both truly SaaS products. That means that when your site visitors request a page, it is 100% served by the SaaS layer. XM and XP do not enter into the delivery piece. Guys, this means that you now have a fully SaaS product for the delivery of your content. Vercel also gives you DDoS protection, automatic scaling, CDN. This is really huge. Just to wrap up the architecture, XM and Content Hub are supported, and I believe by the time you see this at Symposium, XP will be supported too. They all publish content to Experience Edge, which is a globally scaled endpoint. Then your Vercel app, which is also globally scaled, or perhaps some other app if you choose not to go the Vercel route, consumes content from there to deliver other pages. Now we focused on XM because XM gives you a real WCMS environment, meaning you've got WYSIWYG page editing, etc. If you're content to leave page layout and page composition to your front-end developers, then other platforms, particularly Content Hub, become much more compelling as your back-end authoring environment.
And once you've embraced this new architecture, you can start layering up all the new Sitecore products. Sitecore Send, Sitecore CDP, Order Cloud, and whatever else is next for your advanced marketing features. You can find this slide and other quick assets in our virtual booth. Visit the Arke booth after the presentation. Feel free to grab copies to use these for your internal architecture conversations. You can use this one as a cheat sheet to help your team understand the old versus the new components in a modern Sitecore architecture.
So now we're going to take a minute and see some of this modern architecture in action and in code. So for the first part of our demo, we're going to talk a bit about the improvements in the developer experience when you're working with Next.js and Sitecore. Now this isn't going to be a full-blown tutorial. If you're interested in more detail, the site that I'm working with here actually is the JSS Style Guide site that's available for download from Sitecore, together with some great documentation. And Nick Wesselman has put out a great video that kind of gives you a walkthrough and understanding how to wire this up with Next.js, the step-by-step instructions on how to go about using it and what it looks like when you're working with it. I'm just going to kind of dive in pretty deep to the one thing that we really want to get into, and that is how much faster the developer experience can be when you're working with Next.js. So you can see here on the left, we're looking at a local website running in a set of Docker containers that I've got just running in a local Docker instance. There's a CM instance, a CD instance, and there's also something called a Next.js rendering host. And that allows me in real time to be able to render these pages, either whether I'm in the experience editor or in what would amount to the CD, right away without having to wait for things to recompile. And I'll show you how that looks. On the right, you've got the Next.js source code for this rendering that you see here on the page. That's what we call a CTA or a spot. This one's called basic spot. And if you're not familiar with Next.js, it's not particularly scary. At the top, you've got just some basically imports for the types that are going to be used in this rendering. You've got what could be considered analogous to a constructor that basically goes in and maps the or declares the types that we're going to find in the template that is used as the data source template for this rendering. So whenever this rendering is dropped on the page, it should be associated with the data source template, and that data source template should have a heading, a link, and a body text field in it. And then lastly, we've got what's called the JSX markup, not too different from Razor syntax. You've got your HTML the way you would expect it, and then there is some Next.js components that have been provided to us in the Sitecore SDK, so that we've got basically the same field renderers that we would have if we were working in MVC. So if this were an MVC project over here on the right, and I were to make a change to it, any change at all, even if I was just changing some styling, making some changes to the styling, I would have to save it, build it, and then reload my local Sitecore instance before I could see that change. Depending on the size of your solution, that build and that restart could take quite a long time. It's kind of a running gag that it's coffee time whenever we have to build and see our changes. But when I'm working with Next.js, it's very, very different. So say, for example, our marketing came to us and said, this border around here, we want that border to be a lot thicker. So I'm going to just go to my code and I'm going to say that I want to make it a 3-pixel border. And what's more, we want to put a little background color on here. So I'm going to say BG color. And let's just get a bit of nice. Let's make it light coral because, I'm such a great designer. I'm sure everybody's going to love to see that. So when I save this, again, over here on the left, this is the CD for this website running in a local Docker instance. Watch what happens when I click save. Updated virtually instantly. I didn't have to wait for a long build. I didn't have to wait for Sitecore to reload. Everything was just fine. And interestingly enough, that happens also in the experience editor. This is the experience editor view of that same page on the local CM. And I'll point out to you, if you look down here at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a little thing that tells us that Next.js is doing a live reload. So I'm going to get rid of this ugly background color. I decided, after all, that's just not great styling. So I'm going to delete that, and and as soon as I hit save, 1, 2, 3, boom, the change is visible on my local. So now I can do all the work that I need to do, and you can imagine, obviously I'm showing a very simple scenario here, but you can imagine how complex a scenario would get, like if you were to add fields from the template, change around the ordering of them, add in logic that iterated over content, whatever it is you might be doing, you're not waiting for long periods of time before you can see your changes. For the second half of the demo, we're going to take a look at what it's like to work with Vercel as our SaaS hosting provider. Now, I should point out that you don't have to use either Next.js or Vercel in order to take advantage of the power of Sitecore Experience Edge and eliminate all of that CD server farm overhead. There's direct support for MVC, and there's been a lot of interesting work being done. I've seen things, everything from Storybook to Blazor. So again, like before, we're not going to have a detailed tutorial on how to set up Vercel for work with Next.js. If you want to do that, there's some great documentation from Sitecore about exactly how to go about deploying to Vercel for production. And again, our friend Nick Wesselman at Sitecore has provided a really great walkthrough step-by-step video. It shows us how to set up Vercel, how to wire it up to our Sitecore instance, and how to be able to see everything happening in action. So we're going to start out with a bit of a pre-bake here. You can see that this is Vercel. I've already created a Vercel account. I've already hooked it up to my Sitecore instance. I've already published my production version of the site, and I can go look at it at the URL that the public would be looking at it. Now, clearly, if this was a paid account instead of a developer account, I could have this connected to an actual custom hostname. But everything's working already in Vercel, and it's already set up. Where this gets interesting is when we start talking about how it is going to enable us to do what we call pace-layered development, meaning that simple changes can work at a very fast pace, complex changes can work at a much slower pace. Those can be QA'd independently of each other, and they don't get in each other's way. So let's talk a little bit about that. This is our Visual Studio, actually VS Code solution, same as we were looking at during the first half of the demo. And what I'm going to do, the same scenario, we've gotten a request from marketing that we want to change the width of that border, so I'm going to create a new branch. Let's call it Sim Demo. And now that I have my new branch, I can go ahead and make that change to the thickness of the border. This time I'm going to make it 3 pixels thick, hoping that they're going to be happy with that change. And when I save it, we see that there is a change waiting to be committed here. I'm going to go ahead and commit that. And I'm going to go ahead and push it to our GitHub repo. And we need to create an upstream branch for that. So there will be now this branch will be on our GitHub repo. And that's actually where things get interesting. Because if we go back to Vercel, we've already hooked Vercel up to our GitHub repo. So if I go over here and say look at deployments, we can see that Vercel has noticed that a new branch has been committed, and it is busily building an entire separate built version of the site with all of the content, incorporating just the changes that are in this branch. So now I have an entirely separate QA URL where I can see just the feature that I'm working on, but I can see it in the context of the entire site. So our QA people aren't limited to just one sample page or anything like that. They've got the entire site that they can check this change on without it being interfered with other builds that are going on, other development that's being done. And if you're curious, we can go take a look at what Vercel's doing under the hood, where it's building the site. And you can see that it's got pretty well all the way through it. We're just going to wait a few seconds for it to get to the end. So here we are with the magic of video editing about 30 seconds later into the process, and Vercel has completely finished building this separate QA branch of our site. It's provided us with a completely separate URL that we can view it from, and when we go visit it, we can see that here's our site with our beautiful 3-pixel border already implemented. And what's great about that, again, it's entirely separate from the production version of the site. The public is still seeing it this way, but I've got an internal URL that I can submit to our QA team so that they can test this and decide whether or not they're willing to accept it. So let's say for a second that they're happy with it. We're going to go to GitHub, kind of do this the easy way and create a pull request here. Sim demo was pushed. We're going to create a pull request. And because I have a lot of confidence in my own code, I'm going to go ahead and merge my own pull request. I'm quite sure that it's good. And what that's going to do, obviously, is merge this into the main branch. So again, if we go back to Vercel, we can see, if we look at the deployments, that Vercel has noticed that main has had an updated, has been merged from a branch. And so it's going to go ahead and update the entire site based on that change. And again, we can watch the Vercel build in action. It's just getting started. So again, with the magic of Hollywood, we'll pause until it's finished. Okay, so we've jumped forward a little bit in time, and the build is completed. Now the main branch has incorporated our change. So we can go back to looking at our demo, and we can go to the main URL for it. And now we can see the production version of our site has that change. So here we have it, a full-on multi-feature development cycle where every feature is developed independently, QA'd independently, and deployed independently. Some pretty cool stuff. Let's take a minute and highlight the real-world business benefits of this new architecture. First, we'll look at a classic gated development cycle using Sitecore and MVC. In this cycle, the wait time for a given feature is typically measured in days to weeks. Development runs in sprints of 1 to 2 weeks, and that means our marketing customer is waiting for the end of a development sprint and then waiting for a QA cycle. QA is usually a single environment, so every feature in the sprint is held in QA until the entire release has been tested or approved and rejected. Then we wait for a scheduled deployment. Sometimes that happens immediately, but in some organizations that can be as long as 4 to 8 weeks later. Our marketing customer is waiting for this entire cycle to complete for an entire batch of features. Now, if you look over on the left side, on the bottom, you'll notice another drag on this process is developer productivity. Many of you out there know how painfully slow it can be when you're running Sitecore in a local development environment. The wait for the full solution to recompile and for Sitecore to restart just so you can see the result of the last few lines of code that you changed. Here we're looking at a feature-driven, pace-layered development cycle using a headless architecture. First, to the last point on the last slide, our developers are freed from the slow responses to code changes. You see your changes virtually instantly, which really supercharges development time. But it gets better from there. You work on each feature in a separate development branch. When you push that branch, Vercel creates a completely separate QA URL for the entire site that incorporates just that change. That means each feature is developed at its own pace and can undergo QA without any dependency on the pace of other features. Once approved, the PR for each change results in immediate deployment to production. Again, independent of any other changes working in process. So simple things go fast and hard things go slower.
Thank you all for attending our session. I hope you learned a little today about how to reduce the infrastructure costs, accelerate your development and speed to market, provide infinite scalability, and take advantage of all the new Sitecore products in your architecture. From here, go over to the Arke virtual booth where you'll find the slides from our deck, specifically the architecture slide and the before and after slide. Also, for Sitecore attendees, you'll find offerings of a modernization assessment and an XP usage audit. Thank you very much.